Alright, you guys, it's Elevated coming at you today. We are just going to dive into this one. So we're finally at the point where we can stop looking at all these copes and all these like failed attempts at symbolic heroism and symbolic immortality, and we can finally get to the meat of this book, which is actually looking at solutions that aren't copes, that do actually like successfully secure, or I wouldn't even say it successfully secures immortality. It just brings you closer to accepting your own mortality or your own death or whatever. And we can kind of like, we'll look into it as we go into it. But yeah, so we're going to start off with Kierkegaard's religious solution, and then we'll look at Otto Rank's artistic solution. And then that's just going to be this video for today. And then next time, I still haven't decided if I'm going to split up Ernest Becker's conclusions and my own conclusions separately or put them together in the same video, but we'll just see how long they take. But yeah, so Kierkegaard's religious solution. This is just a quote from him. I think we're actually going to look at the full quote of this. So, one can only talk about an ideal human character from a perspective of absolute transcendence. And it's just one of those things where, like, most perspectives of what a quote-unquote ideal human character is like going to be flawed. Because it's only from like a materialist perspective, or like either like a humanist, like just like nothing above like you can't talk about an ideal human character, because ideal is supposed to be like perfect or above what's normally achievable. So you can't talk about what would be above without the perspective of something else that is above, or in other words, absolute transcendence. But yeah, to be a normal cultural man, quote, is for Kierkegaard to be sick, whether one knows it or not. There is such a thing as fictitious health. Nietzsche later put the same thought. Are there perhaps, a question for psychiatrists, neuroses of health? But Kierkegaard not only posed the question, he also answered it. If health is not cultural normality, then it must refer to something else, must point beyond man's usual situation, his habitual ideas. Mental health, in a word, is not typical, but ideal typical. It is something far beyond man, something to be achieved, striven for, something that leads man beyond himself. The healthy person, the true individual, the self-realized soul, the real man, is the one who has transcended himself. And this kind of goes in line when we talk. I think we talked about it in the preface of this, how man is a unique creature because he stands on the precipice of either falling back into animality or beast, like just animal nature, or rising above that, beyond that, reaching like the heights of like sainthood, or I don't want to say godhood, but yeah, sainthood and like spiritual, like being able to rise above. Now, we looked at that in the preface as like a dichotomy, like a struggle between like trying to like have a symbolic self while also having a physical, like mundane self. However, with Kierkegaard talking about it in this way, it's more of like, it's not like you're completely relying on your symbolic self. It's more like you're well, like he says, you've transcended both of those. But yeah, it goes into more detail. How does one transcend himself? How does he open himself to new possibility? By realizing the truth of his situation, by dispelling the lie of his character, by breaking his spirit out of its conditioned prison. The enemy, for Kierkegaard as for Freud, is the Oedipus complex. The child has built up strategies and techniques for keeping his self-esteem in the face of the terror of his situation. These techniques become an armor that hold the person prisoner. The very defenses that he needs in order to move about with self-confidence and self-esteem become his lifelong trap. In order to transcend himself, he must break down that which he needs in order to live. Like Lear, he must throw off all his cultural lendings and stand naked in the storm of life. Kierkegaard had no illusions about man's urge to freedom. He knew how comfortable people were inside the prison of their character defenses. Like many prisoners, they are comfortable in their limited and protected routines, and the idea of a parole into the wide world of chance, accident, and choice terrifies them. In the prison of one's character, one can pretend and feel that he is somebody, that the world is manageable, that there is a reason for one's life, a ready justification for one's action. To live automatically and uncritically is to be assured of at least a minimum share of the programmed cultural heroics, what we might call prison heroism, the smugness of the insiders who know. What did I want to say about this? This latter half, or this bottom half of the... In the prison of one's character, one can pretend and feel that he is somebody, that the world is manageable, that there is a reason for one's life, a ready justification for one's action. So that's kind of the summation of like what copes are and like what society is in general. Like these programmed cultural heroics is what he calls them. Like it's just that thing of like, yeah, I can, and it's always like, like I always bring back up that guy from Soul, the movie Soul, the one who he said he wanted to go to college to become a vet, but he ended up being a barber. And so the main character is like, well, that sucks for you. And he's like, well, actually, no, like I make the most out of my life, and like I meet a lot of really cool people, blah, 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 blah. So it's one of those things where it's like, these programmed cultural heroics, like it's people do rely on them, but at the same time there is a I don't want to say like a saintliness or some, it kind of is a saintliness in like just doing like mundane labor in a sense. But it's not like that guy from Soul. He's never gonna be like, he's never gonna, he's not self-entitled. Like he doesn't feel like he's owed anything. Like he just does his job as a service and like gets fulfillment. Like it's a different kind of like, you're not sitting there and trying to be like, oh, I'm special because I do blah 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 blah. It's more like it's more like I am special, but I'm using my specialness just to do this. I don't know. It's like I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's not just the action itself, it's like the intention behind it that really changes the whole thing. But yeah, we'll go ahead and continue because I don't think I can finish that thought. But yeah, Kierkegaard's torment was the direct result of seeing the world as it really is in relation to his situation as a creature. The prison of one's character is painstakingly built to deny one thing and one thing alone: one's creatureliness. The creatureliness is the terror. There's a typo in there. I've read this book way too many times, and it's funny that I can just tell like where there are just whole words missing. Once you admit that, wow, this whole thing is bad. Once you admit that you are a defecating creature and that whole thing is just bad. Wow. Once you admit that you are a defecating creature, you invite the whole primeval ocean of creature anxiety to flood over you. But now Kierkegaard seems to have led us into an impasse, an impossible situation. He has told us that by realizing the truth of our condition, we can transcend ourselves. And on the other hand, he tells us that the truth of our condition is our complete and abject creatureliness, which seems to push us down still further on the scale of self-realization, further away from any possibility of self-transcendence. So this is what I was talking about, like the dichotomy of being like an animal, like mundane, like bodily, material self, and then the other aspect of being like a spiritual, symbolic, immaterial self. They seemingly contradict, and that's usually what most people fall into, is just being like having those two contradictory aspects of yourself conflict with each other. But as Kierkegaard explains it, this is only an apparent contradiction. The flood of anxiety is not the end for man. It is, rather, a school that provides man with the ultimate education, the final maturity. It is a better teacher than reality, says Kierkegaard, because reality can be lied about, twisted, and tamed by the tricks of cultural perception and repression. But anxiety cannot be lied about. Once you face up to it, it reveals the truth of your situation. And only by seeing that truth can you open a new possibility for yourself. He who is educated by dread or anxiety is educated by possibility. When such a person, therefore, goes out from the school of possibility and knows more thoroughly than a child knows the alphabet that he demands of life absolutely nothing, and that terror, perdition, annihilation dwell next door to every man, and has learned the profitable lesson that every dread which alarms may the next instant become a fact, he will then interpret reality differently. Yeah, so I think this is really funny, because when he talks, reality can be lied about, twisted, and tamed by the tricks of cultural perception and repression. Absolutely. But like it's he says anxiety cannot be lied about, which I think is hilarious, because the one thing that like I've noticed among most people, there's very few people I've met that are truly content, truly calm, and I can probably count them on one hand the amount of people I've met that are like serene. They have this like otherworldly like calmness about them. Every other person I've met in my entire life, like you can tell there is this underlying like dread or this underlying like anxiety about the world. And it's like, it's funny because like people will like, it's one of those copes. It's just so easy to like drag these people's attentions towards a target or towards like something to blame for this anxiety. And so like that instinctual fear drive of like, oh, I have to kill it, I have to get rid of this thing that is causing me this dread, like it's just so natural. And it's so funny because like I said, a lot of these are copes, and like that's what the cope does, is it makes you think, oh, if you kill this one thing, if you fight this enemy, then all of your dread, all of your anxiety will go away. And it's like, no, you're not getting deep enough. Like that's why all of these are copes, because they don't actually solve the issue. Like they're just ways for you to cope with the anxiety. It doesn't actually have you face up to it. But yeah, I just think it's funny that it's like, yeah, reality can be lied about. Reality can be perceived differently. But that underlying, that little itch, or like that little like gnawing like annoyance in the back of your head or wherever you happen to feel it, like that sticks around, and owning up to that, facing up to that, that's the real challenge right there. So yeah, no mistake about it. The curriculum in the school of anxiety is the unlearning of repression, of everything that the child taught himself to deny, so that he could move about with a minimal animal equanimity. Kierkegaard is thus placed directly in the Augustinian Lutheran tradition. Education for man means facing up to his natural impotence and death. As Luther urged us, I say, die, i.e., taste death as though it were present. It is only if you taste death with the lips of your living body that you can know emotionally that you are a creature who will die. What Kierkegaard is saying, in other words, is that the school of anxiety leads to possibility only by destroying the vital lie of character. It seems like the ultimate self-defeat, the one thing that one should not do, because then one will have truly nothing left. But rest assured, says Kierkegaard, the direction is quite normal. The self must be broken in order to become a self. William James summed up beautifully this Lutheran tradition in the following words. This is the salvation through self-despair, the dying to be truly born of Lutheran theology, the passage into nothing of which Jacob Boehme writes. To get to it, a critical point must usually be passed, a corner turned within one. Something must give way. A native hardness must break down and liquefy. This is the destruction of the emotional character armor of Lear, of the Zen Buddhists, of modern psychotherapy, and in fact of self-realized men in any epoch. That great spirit, Ortega, has given us a particularly powerful phrasing of it. His statement reads almost exactly like Kierkegaard. The man with the clear head is the man who frees himself from these fantastic ideas, or the characterological lie about reality, and looks life in the face, realizes that everything in it is problematic, and feels himself lost. And this is the simple truth, that to live is to feel oneself lost. He who accepts it has already begun to find himself to be on firm ground. Instinctively, as do the shipwrecked, he will look around for something to which to cling, and that tragic, ruthless glance, absolutely sincere because it is a question of his salvation, will cause him to bring order into the chaos of his life. These are the only genuine ideas, the ideas of the shipwrecked. All the rest is rhetoric, posturing, farce. He who does not really feel himself lost is without remission. That is to say, he never finds himself, never comes up against his own reality. I had one of my haikus was about this, just off the top of my head, if I can remember it correctly. It was like, falling down the endless waterfall of life or whatever. I don't know. What is there to cling to or from? But yeah, this idea of like, yeah, you do have to like let yourself go and like almost float for a sec. And so the arrival at new possibility, at new reality, by the destruction of the self through facing up to the anxiety of the terror of existence. The self must be destroyed, brought down to nothing, in order for self-transcendence to begin. Then the self can begin to relate itself to powers beyond itself. It has to thrash around in its finitude. It has to die in order to question that finitude, in order to see beyond it. To what? Kierkegaard answers, to infinitude, to absolute transcendence, to the ultimate power of creation which made finite creatures. Our modern understanding of psychodynamics confirms that this progression is very logical. If you admit that you are a creature, you accomplish one basic thing. You demolish all your unconscious power linkages or supports. I'm trying to see, because like there was one thing. I can't remember if I put it in here or not. Okay, yeah, I guess it's at the very end. But yeah, this slide or this excerpt does not do the topic justice. Like this idea of like thrashing around infinitude, having to die, and then trying to find some way to relate like the quote-unquote self to infinitude or to absolute transcendence. Like it's probably like the simplest way to put it, but the process itself, like I don't want to make it sound like complex or difficult, but it's like I will say it's like arduous. It is like an uphill battle. It's not to say it's difficult or impossible. It's just like that's where your strength and your courage has to come and play, is just to like thrash about in like almost want to say like meaninglessness to find meaning, or like he said in the last slide, like causing one to bring order into the chaos of one's life. Like it's something like it's pretty much like that, like thrashing about in meaninglessness to find meaning, which sounds paradoxical. And I know, like, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, like, I know, like, that idea is probably not gonna jive with you. Because it's not something that can, like, easily be, like, described. Well, I mean, that's like most spiritual things. Like, it's an experience. It's not... it's an experiential process. It's like... yeah. It's like trying to describe, like, chemical reactions, but, like, only the reactions itself. Like, chemists are really good at having the chemicals on one end and then, like, showing, like, the reaction process and then having the outcome on the other end. Like, they're good at the input and the outcome, but, like, the process that happens in between, it's not easily, like, described or understood. But, yeah. Each child grounds himself in some power that transcends him. Usually it is a combination of his parents, his social group, and the symbols of his society and nation. This is the unthinking web, wink wink, of support which allows him to believe in himself, as he functions on the automatic security of delegated powers. He doesn't, of course, admit to himself that he lives on borrowed powers, as that would lead him to question his own secure action, the very confidence that he needs. Yeah. So this is why you can't, like, it's very hard to, like, tell, like, you're not gonna go up to someone and be like, hey, you're coping, like, this is, you trying to do this, like, people are not gonna, like, what's it called? They're not gonna respond to that, or, yeah, resonate with that. He has denied his creatureliness precisely. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, if you don't look at it yourself, you're not gonna, like, see it. Like, if you don't want to see it, like, you won't. Like, you'll stay in delusion. But yeah, if you truly want to, like, explore yourself and, like, dive deeper into, like, your underlying motivations and stuff, like, yeah, it's easy to see. But yeah. He has denied his creatureliness precisely by imagining that he has secure power, and this secure power has been tapped by unconsciously leaning on the persons and things of his society. Once you expose the basic weakness and emptiness of the person, his helplessness, then you are forced to re-examine the whole problem of power linkages. You have to think about reforging them to a real source of creative and generative power. It is at this point that one can begin to posit creatureliness vis-a-vis a creator who is the first cause of all created things, not merely the second-hand intermediate creators of society, the parents and panoply of cultural heroes. These are the social and cultural progenitors who themselves have been caused, who themselves are embedded in a web, wink wink, of someone else's powers. Once the person begins to look to his relationship to the ultimate power, to infinitude, and to refashion his links from those around him to that ultimate power, he opens up to himself the horizon of unlimited possibility of real freedom. This is Kierkegaard's message, the culmination of his whole argument about the dead ends of character, the ideal of health, the school of anxiety, the nature of real possibility and freedom. One goes through it all to arrive at faith, the faith that one's very creatureliness has some meaning to a creator, that despite one's true insignificance, weakness, death, one's existence has meaning in some ultimate sense because it exists within an eternal and infinite scheme of things brought about and maintained to some kind of design by some creative force. And like I've mentioned it before. I don't know if it was in this series, but I have mentioned it before about atheists. Like, it's funny because like they go so far and like they go ask further questions to like quote unquote like dispute religion, but then like the conclusions they come up with because of those questions asked, like, they don't necessarily track. Like, the one thing I always bring up is how they're like, oh, if God is so good, why is there evil in the world? What's that one quote they always say? If God is all powerful, then he can't be all good. If God is all good, then he can't be all powerful. Just on the basis of this world existing and like the nature of suffering and stuff like that. But I think I mentioned it before. It's like that extra, whatever created this realm, like, that's not, like, you need to go one step further beyond this realm and whoever created it. Like, there's one's true insignificance, weakness, death. Like, that's... like, no matter how much of an influence you can have on, like, human politics or, like, human history or science or anything like that, like, you are still insignificant, and that's just, like, humans in general are insignificant. This planet is, like, there's very limited reasons for its significance, and it's not going to be anything like you'll like, you're not gonna reap the benefits of its significance in any way. So, like, you do have to go out, like, you do have to transcend this entire realm, basically, and the self, in order to, like, truly connect with, like, a transcendent, like, cosmic significance in, like, a larger, much larger sense. I guess I'll mention it now. I'll kind of go into it more, but, like, basically, in my head, the way I explain it is like, it's like, I'm not trying to, like, earn my way into heaven, or, like, I'm not, like, desiring to go to heaven, or, like, things like that corrupted, like, desire or whatever, yearning, grasping, reaching. It's more like viewing, it's like the perspective of, like, I have a component, like an aspect of myself that does belong in heaven, and I'm going to, like, whatever this life may be, I'm doing my best to let that aspect rule me, and, like, just live as if I were already in heaven, or, like, just living like I would do, like, the thing, like, like, I'm not, like, thirsting for power, or like you're like, it's just finding like that equanimity, or that like what you would call it, that like truly like profound contentment in oneself, to the point where like I'm only doing what like how do I explain? Like it's self-actualizing, like the spirit or the soul. It's just like tearing yourself apart to like find the real pieces, only to like truly focus on them and build those up. I don't know. I think that explains it for the most part. We'll see if we can get more into depth with this. I think we can, as we go through this text. So if we put this whole progression in terms of our discussion of the possibilities of heroism, it goes like this. Man breaks through the bonds of merely cultural heroism. He destroys the character lie that had him perform as a hero in the everyday social scheme of things. And by doing so, he opens himself up to infinity, to the possibility of cosmic heroism, to the very service of God. His life thereby acquires ultimate value in place of merely social and cultural historical value. He links his secret inner self, his authentic talent, his deepest feelings of uniqueness, his inner yearning for absolute significance, to the very ground of creation. Out of the ruins of the broken cultural self, there remains the mystery of the private, invisible inner self which yearned for ultimate significance. For cosmic heroism. This invisible mystery at the heart of every creature now attains cosmic significance by affirming its connection with the invisible mystery at the heart of creation. This is the meaning of faith. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I was trying to say. Breaking down the old programmed self to reach this this essence, or this when you really do this soul searching or whatever, trying to find yourself, you do start learning the feel of oneself. There is intuition, or just random thoughts in your head, or I wouldn't even call them desires. They're more gentle pushes toward certain directions, whether it's pushing me to look a certain way, or walk, or go to a certain place. You do start to piece out what is you and what is not you. And then I know this one's gonna ruffle some atheist feathers. Opening yourself up to infinity, to the possibility of cosmic heroism, to the very service of God. And I definitely had this same mindset growing up. This is one of the things that pushed me away from religion early on. It's almost this idea of being a slave to God's will, which I mean totally makes it makes sense when you put it in those terms. Of course it sounds oppressive or whatever, but the way I explain it is it's not I as a soul, or as a I don't know, I never had desire to harm my soul. Yeah, from the deepest part of me, the soul, or the essence, I never had a desire to harm other beings. Is that the line? No, we'll talk about because I like this line better. So this the secret inner self, the authentic talent, just finding that thing that like fulfills you, that like mastering a skill or an art, like that's more in line with like quote unquote service to God than like trying to proselytize or convert people. Like just spreading that like good, I don't know, because then you good versus evil. Like I don't want to talk about it in those terms. It's more like, I'm not like, when people think, when you say good versus evil, good, you always view it as like, oh, they're rebels, they're fighting against the empire, or like we have to righteousness and like stand up and fight and do all, like fighting is always like a central like tenet of like good versus evil. But the good, quote unquote good, that I'm talking about, this service to God goodness, is more like finding that authentic talent, spreading your talent, and like just proliferating like that deep spiritual urge to create and grow, or not grow. It's almost like I said, self-actualizing. Like, so that is more in line with like, it's not God wants you to go out and convert your friends or kill them if they don't decide to convert. Like, no, that's not service to God. Service of God is more like, just finding that inner essence and channeling it. What's it called? Like just embodying it, really. Like self-discipline, just making sure that like that part of you is the one that's in control, and not like your animalistic self or your egoic, greedy, power-hungry, desirous self. But we'll go ahead and continue. At the same time, it is the meaning of the merger of psychology and religion in Kierkegaard's thought. The truly open person, the one who has shed his character armor, the vital lie of his cultural conditioning, is beyond the help of any mere science, of any mere social standard of health. He is absolutely alone and trembling on the brink of oblivion, which is at the same time the brink of infinity. To give him the new support that he needs, the courage to renounce dread without any dread, only faith is capable of, says Kierkegaard. Not that this is an easy out for man, or a cure-all for the human condition. Kierkegaard is never facile. He gives a strikingly beautiful idea. Not that faith annihilates dread, but remaining ever young, it is continually developing itself out of the death throe of dread. In other words, as long as man is an ambiguous creature, he can never banish anxiety. What he can do instead is to use anxiety as an eternal spring for growth into new dimensions of thought and trust. And this is where faith finally makes sense. So it's like, it's whether or not there is this absolute transcendence that you can achieve. We'll just go ahead and assume there's not. If there's not this absolute transcendence that you can achieve, what's the point of faith, or like this idea of like having, or this idea of faith? Basically, it's like you are an ambiguous creature. You are on the precipice of being symbolic and material. And there's no like way to, well, there's no like common sense way to coalesce the two, or to merge the two. So like you're constantly living in anxiety because you don't know which part is your real self. And it seems like the more you exercise one, or the more you nourish one part, the more the other part tends to wither. So it's like this constant, like, okay, what should I focus on? What, like just not knowing, like this ambiguity of like not knowing. And like just constantly being like dreading death, because it's like, it is like a, because whether you're symbolic or material. Like, death is present for both of those. Like, you could be like put all your points into symbolic self and like create this everlasting like impact on human society, but eventually human society is going to wither and die as well. So it's always like this, like, you'll never truly banish that anxiety unless you bring faith into the into the equation. And that faith is like the idea of like whether or not there is an absolute transcendence, like, I am going to live as if there is and try to be as harmonious with whatever my quote-unquote true self would be. Which is like... It's almost like, even if like there isn't a true self, we'll take that hypothetical into account as well. It's almost like you're forging it. So like you're literally like taking apart all of these lies, all of these copes, all of these ideas that like you use as a crutch for your own like character lie, for your own egoic pacification. And like you're almost like reforging it and like really sussing out what true, like you're actually, like, that is what actualization is. Like, you're actualizing yourself. You're taking a husk of like just programmed cultural habits and conditions, unprogramming it and like designing something new almost, or like I don't know how to say it. Like, it's whatever. That's under the hypothetical that there is no transcendent. Like, this is from the atheist perspective, like not having a soul or a transcendent self. Me personally, I'm of the other opinion that there is. So it's like, it's just a matter of like sussing yourself out. Like, basically like feeling yourself out, pulling yourself together, like getting rid of all this these like cobwebs of programming that like cover or like conceal your true self. But yeah, that's what faith is. And that's other thing too, is like you'll never actually get rid of the dread. It's always like, okay, I'm dreading it, but it's like giving yourself a perspective of like, okay, this is dread. I am going to die. What am I going to do about it? And most people choose to ignore it and try to enjoy life as much and try to suck up all the enjoyments, and they try to be greedy and get all the desires and all the trinkets and pleasures that they can. But like, like, that's not what this place is for. This place is for like sussing out like, okay, if you only had one chance to live, who would you be and what would that make you and what would you do, almost. So that's Kierkegaard's religious solution, is like finding that faith, or like finding that absolute transcendence, not as a crutch, but just as like a perspective place to give yourself an ideal to strive towards, a direction or a path to walk down. So yeah, that's Kierkegaard's solution, but that's still only half. Now we're going to look at authentic talent, which is Rank's artistic solution. And excuse the music, I'm at the lake and these fuckers are drunk and just blaring music. But whatever. You probably can't even hear it all that well. We'll see. But yeah, Rank's artistic solution, and we'll dive into this. So personal heroism through individuation is a very daring venture, precisely because it separates the person out of comfortable beyonds. It takes a strength and a courage the average man doesn't have and couldn't even understand, as Jung so well points out. The most terrifying burden of the creature is to be isolated, which is what happens in individuation. One separates himself out of the herd. This move exposes the person to the sense of being completely crushed and annihilated because he sticks out so much, has to carry so much in himself. These are the risks when the person begins to fashion consciously and critically his own framework of heroic self-reference. Here is precisely the definition of the artist type, or the creative type generally. Yeah, so this is another reason why people, I guess you would call it like the fear of success, or like this is why people don't, the fear of possibility, or like what did he call it? Like fear of possibility, fear of like freedom, really, just like having the freedom to do anything and like trying to go out and achieve that is a very, hold on, it's getting hot in my car, I'm just gonna turn the AC on. Like having that, like going out without a safety net, basically. And then once you do finally go out and try to like forge your own meaning in this world, like we looked at earlier, when he called it like the prison mentality, prison heroism, the smugness of the insiders who know. So like you'll go out and you'll try to do all of this like artistic building, or like try to fashion your own sense of meaning in the world, and other people will look at you like crabs in a bucket. Like they'll just try to drag you down and be like, why you gotta do all that? Like I'm literally like, I'm just living a regular life and I'm special. What are you doing? Like that's so, like, I don't know. Yeah, it is what it is. So yeah, this idea of like being like an artist or creative type, or just having to like forge one's own uniqueness or one's own individuality, as opposed to like picking up like a template or a pre-programmed one, like, oh, get this job or get into this career or something, or grow this type of family or something like that. Like, yeah, it's a lot. Like it really, like he said, like the nail that sticks out is the first that gets hit or whatever. But yeah, the key to the creative type is that he is separated out of the common pool of shared meanings. There is something in his life experience that makes him take in the world as a problem. As a result, he has to make personal sense out of it. This holds true for all creative people to a greater or lesser extent, but it is especially obvious with the artist. Existence becomes a problem that needs an ideal answer. But when you no longer accept the collective solution to the problem of existence, then you must fashion your own. The work of art is, then, the ideal answer of the creative type to the problem of existence as he takes it in. Not only the existence of the external worlds, but especially his own. Who he is as a painfully separate person with nothing shared to lean on. He has to answer to the burden of his extreme individuation, his so painful isolation. He wants to know how to earn immortality as a result of his own unique gifts. His creative work is at the same time the expression of his heroism and the justification of it. It is his private religion, as Rank put it. Its uniqueness gives him personal immortality. It is his own beyond and not that of others. No sooner have we said this than we can see the immense problem that it poses. How can one justify his own heroism? He would have to be as God. Now we see even further how guilt is inevitable for man. Even as a creator, he is a creature overwhelmed by the creative process itself. If you stick out of nature so much that you yourself have to create your own heroic justification, it is too much. This is how we understand something that seems illogical. That the more you develop as a distinctive, free, and critical human being, the more guilt you have. Your very work accuses you. It makes you feel inferior. What right do you have to play God? Especially if your work is great, absolutely new and different. You wonder where to get the authority for introducing new meanings into the world, the strength to bear it. It all boils down to this. The work of art is the artist's attempt to justify his heroism objectively in the concrete creation. It is a testimonial to his absolute uniqueness and heroic transcendence. But the artist is still a creature, and he can feel it more intensely than anyone else. In other words, he knows that the work is therefore bad, ephemeral, potentially meaningless, unless justified from outside himself and outside itself. So yeah, this problem, like, again, if you're not gonna have the perspective of like this like aloof, like detached perspective of absolute transcendence, like he says, the work of art is just the artist attempts to justify his heroism objectively in the concrete creation. So this is the difference between a cope and a solution, really, is like this. You're trying to justify your heroism or your immortality or your uniqueness or specialness or your meaning, basically. You're trying to justify your entire meaning, quote unquote, objectively in the concrete creation, which, like I said, everything in this concrete creation is it's going to fade. Like, it does not last forever. So no matter what you do, if you're trying just solely to justify yourself in this concrete, in the objectiveness of this concrete creation, like, you're not, like, that's not it. Like, you're still gonna have that dread, you're still gonna have that anxiety, if you're still gonna confine yourself to this realm. But yeah, in Jung's terms that we noted previously, the work is the artist's own transference projection, and he knows that consciously and critically. Whatever he does, he is stuck with himself. Can't get securely outside and beyond himself. He is also stuck with the work of art itself. Like any material achievement, it is visible, earthly, and permanent. No matter how great it is, it still pales in some ways next to the transcending majesty of nature. And so it is ambiguous, hardly a solid immortality symbol. In his greatest genius, man is still mocked. No wonder that historically, art and psychosis have had such an intimate relationship, that the road to creativity passes so close to the madhouse and often detours or ends there. The artist and the madman are trapped by their own fabrications. They wallow in their own anality, in their protest that they really are something special in creation. The whole thing boils down to this paradox. If you are going to be a hero, then you must give a gift. If you are the average man, you give your heroic gift to the society in which you live, and you give the gift that society specifies in advance. If you are an artist, you fashion a peculiarly personal gift, the justification of your own heroic identity, which means that it is always aimed at least partly over the heads of your fellow men. After all, they can't grant the immortality of your personal soul. As Rank argued in the breathtaking closing chapters of Art and Artist, there is no way for the artist to be at peace with his work or with the society that accepts it. The artist's gift is always to creation itself, to the ultimate meaning of life, to God. We should not be surprised that Rank was brought to exactly the same conclusion as Kierkegaard, that the only way out of human conflict is full renunciation, to give one's life as a gift to the highest powers. Absolution has to come from the absolute beyond. As Kierkegaard, Rank showed that this rule applied to the strongest, most heroic types, not to trembling and empty weaklings. To renounce the world and oneself, to lay the meaning of it to the powers of creation, is the hardest thing for man to achieve. And so it is fitting that this task should fall to the strongest personality type, the one with the largest ego. The great scientific world shaker Newton was the same man who always carried the Bible under his arm. Yep, basically what I just said from the last slide. Even in such cases, the combination of fullest self-expression and renunciation is rare. Excuse me, I'm just taking a sip. So yeah, even in such cases, the combination of fullest self-expression and renunciation is rare, as we saw in Chapter 6 when we speculated about Freud's lifelong problem. From all that we have now covered, the self in history and in personal creativity, we can perhaps draw even closer to the problem of Freud. We know that he was a genius, and we can now see the real problem that genius has. How to develop a creative work with the full force of one's passion, a work that saves one's soul, and at the same time to renounce that very work because it cannot by itself give salvation. In the creative genius, we see the need to combine the most intensive eros of self-expression with the most complete agape of self-surrender. It is almost too much to ask of men that they contrive to experience fully both of these intensities of ontological striving. Perhaps men with lesser gifts have it easier. A small dosage of eros and a comfortable agape. Freud lived the daemon of his eros to the hilt and more honestly than most, and it consumed him and others around him, as it always does, more or less. Psychoanalysis was his personal heroic bid for immortality. As Rank said, he himself could so easily confess his agnosticism while he had created for himself a private religion. But this was precisely Freud's bind. As an agnostic, he had no one to offer his gift to. No one, that is, who had any more security of immortality than he did himself. Not even mankind itself was secure. As he confessed, the specter of the dinosaur still haunts man and will always haunt him. Freud was anti-religious because he somehow could not personally give the gift of his life to a religious ideal. He saw such a step as weakness, a passivity that would defeat his own creative urge for more life. Here, Rank joins Kierkegaard in the belief that one should not stop and circumscribe his life with beyonds that are near at hand, or a bit further out, or created by oneself. One should reach for the highest beyond of religion. Man should cultivate the passivity of renunciation to the highest powers no matter how difficult it is. Anything less is less than full development, even if it seems like weakness and compromise to the best thinkers. Do Freud and others imagine that surrender to God is masochistic, that to empty oneself is demeaning? Well, answers Rank, it represents on the contrary the furthest reach of the self, the highest idealization man can achieve. It represents the fulfillments of the agape love expansion, the achievement of the truly creative type. Only in this way, says Rank, only by surrendering to the bigness of nature on the highest, least fetishized level, can man conquer death. In other words, the true heroic validation of one's life lies beyond sex, beyond the other, beyond the private religion. All these are makeshifts that pull man down or that hem him in, leaving him torn with ambiguity. Man feels inferior precisely when he lacks true inner values in the personality, when he is merely a reflex of something next to him and has no steadying inner gyroscope, no centering in himself. And in order to get such centering, man has to look beyond the thou, beyond the conditions of others and of the things of this world. Man should cultivate the passivity of renunciation to the highest powers. Anything less is less than full development. So just going back to the idea of being on the precipice between the mundane self and the higher spiritual self, like the only way to achieve the heights of human possibility is to or even to transcend human possibility is to from the perspective of transcendence. And then this bottom part, man feels inferior precisely when he lacks true inner values in the personality, which is what I was saying earlier about like actualizing yourself or forging your own like individuality. When you're just operating on like pre-programmed like cultural norms and behaviors, like when you're relying on copes, like that's when this anxiety or this dread is like really present. Whenever like it's you like you haven't forged yourself, you haven't found yourself Like he says, you have no steadying inner gyroscope, no centering in oneself. Now he says, in order to get such centering, man has to look beyond the thou, beyond the conditions of others and of the things of this world. I mean, like, yes, you do have to look beyond this world, but it's not like you're looking, it's basically what I want to say is, like, it's more like looking within. As, like, generic and cliche as that sounds. But it is, like, you can't, like, it is both, like, looking within and looking, or having that transcendent look or perspective. But yeah, you're not gonna find it in the external world, basically. But yeah. So now we'll go a little bit deeper into Freud's problem, which we kind of touched up on already. Just his idea that he could not submit to a transcendent ideal, and that's why, like, he was never, like, secure in his immortality, because he didn't have anything to, like, justify it or redeem it, or not justify it, verify it, really. But yeah, in Rank's system of thought, the most generous judgment that might probably be made about Freud's limitations was that he shared the human weakness of the neurotic. He lacked the capacity for illusion, for a creative myth about the possibilities of creation. He saw things too realistically, without their aura of miracle and infinite possibility. The only illusion he allowed himself was that of his own science, and such a source is bound to be a shaky support because it comes from one's own energies and not from a powerful beyond. This is the problem of the artist generally, that he creates his own new meanings and must in turn be sustained by them. The dialogue is too inverted to be secure. Yeah, he tried to have this, like, objective material perspective, like non-spiritual, like, it's a very flat, and people call it objective, or like, oh, it's just reality, bro, when it's like, no, it's just another perspective. It's not actually reality, because that objective, like, oh, everything is material and there's no other aspect to it, like, okay, then that doesn't explain, like, philosophy or virtue or like any of this immaterial, like, stuff, like ideology and stuff like that. Yeah. Kierkegaard and Freud. Kierkegaard would say that Freud still had pride, that he lacked the creature consciousness of the truly analyzed man, that he had not fully served his apprenticeship in the school of anxiety. In Kierkegaard's understanding of man, the causa sui project is the Oedipus complex, and in order to be a man, one has to abandon it completely. From this point of view, Freud still had not analyzed away his Oedipus complex, no matter how much he and the early psychoanalysts prided themselves that they had. He could not yield emotionally to subordinate power or conceptually to the transcendental dimension. He lived still wholly in the dimension of the visible world and was limited by what was possible in that dimension only. Therefore, all his meanings had to come from that dimension. Which, like I said, if you are trying to derive meaning just from the material world, like, it's not gonna it's not gonna mean much. Basically, but yeah. Kierkegaard had his own formula for what it means to be a man. He put it forth in those superb pages wherein he describes what he calls the Knight of Faith. This figure is the man who lives in faith, who has given over the meaning of life to his creator, and who lives centered on the energies of his maker. He accepts whatever happens in this visible dimension without complaint, lives his life as a duty, faces his death without a qualm. No pettiness is so petty that it threatens his meanings. No task is too frightening to be beyond his courage. He is fully in the world on its terms and wholly beyond the world in his trust in the invisible dimension. It is very much the old pietistic ideal that was lived by Kant's parents. The great strength of such an ideal is that it allows one to be open, generous, courageous, to touch others' lives and enrich them and open them in turn. As the Knight of Faith has no fear of life and death trip to lay onto others, he does not cause them to shrink back upon themselves. He does not coerce or manipulate them. Yeah, so this is the difference between like proselytizing and like actually having an effect on people. Yeah. The Knight of Faith, then, represents what we might call an ideal of mental health, the continuing openness of life out of the death throes of dread. Put in these abstract terms, the ideal of the Knight of Faith is surely one of the most beautiful and challenging ideals ever put forth by man. It is contained in most religions in one form or another, although no one, I think, has described it at length with such talent as Kierkegaard. Like all ideals, it is a creative illusion, meant to lead men on, and leading men on is not the easiest thing. As Kierkegaard said, faith is the hardest thing. He placed himself between belief and faith, unable to make the jump. The jump doesn't depend on man, after all. There's the rub. Faith is a matter of grace. As Tillich later put it, religion is first an open hand to receive gifts or grace, and then a closed hand to give them. One cannot give the gifts of the Knight of Faith without first being dubbed a knight by some higher majesty. So this is this is where Becker kind of veers off. He, like, despite having these two brilliant men and being able to like lay down both of their perspectives on this, he still says, like all ideals, this ideal of the Knight of Faith is a creative illusion meant to lead men on. And yeah, or he has this idea that like faith is a matter of grace, which is almost like saying like you can't just go out and make this leap of faith. Like you have to be gifted with like you have to be blessed enough to have the grace of faith to begin with. I think that's what he's saying. I think that's the idea that he's trying to put forth, where it's like, oh, you can't just like train yourself to make a leap of faith. You either are the type of person that makes a leap of faith, or you aren't. And it's like that's not how it works, but okay. So yeah, we'll look into Becker's thoughts too. The point I'm driving at is that if we take Kierkegaard's life as a believing Christian and place it against Freud's as an agnostic, there is no balance sheet to draw. Who is to tally up which one caused others to shrink up more or to expand more fully? For every shortcoming that we can point to in Freud, we can find a corresponding one in Kierkegaard. If Freud can be said to have erred on the side of the visible, then Kierkegaard can surely be said to have equally erred on the side of the invisible. He turned away from life partly from his fear of life. He embraced death more easily because he had failed in life. His own life was not a voluntary sacrifice undertaken in free will, but a pathetically driven sacrifice. He did not live in the categories in which he thought. Now, these are just Ernest Becker's thoughts. This is what he thinks Kierkegaard. This is what he thinks is the true judgment of Kierkegaard. And if he does have a point. If Kierkegaard, it did turn away from life partly from his fear of life, then, yeah, it's like he says, his own life was not a voluntary sacrifice, but a pathetically driven sacrifice. Like, it's always, the intention is always an aspect behind the action. Like, it can't just be, oh yeah, just do this, this, and this. It's like, no, the intention behind it totally changes the context. But yeah, I think I think what he's trying to do here is just trying to put these two people on equal footing. I still think like he's like Ernest Becker's like an agnostic maybe, or he might be a flat out atheist too, but like he doesn't want to put too much stock into Kierkegaard's religious solution, which is understandable because, like I said, it is like a leap of faith, or it is like you do have to step outside of your comfort zone and like yeah. I am talking matter-of-factly about some of the surest giants in the history of humanity, only to say that in the game of life and death no one stands taller than any other, unless it be a true saint, and only to conclude that sainthood itself is a matter of grace and not of human effort. Again, I totally disagree with that, but whatever. My point is that for man, not everything is possible. What is there to choose between religious creatureliness and scientific creatureliness? The most one can achieve is a certain relaxedness and openness to experience that makes him less of a driven burden on others. And a lot of this depends on how much talent he has, how much of a daemon is driving him. It is easier to lay down light burdens than heavy ones. How does a man create from all his living energies a system of thought, as Freud did, a system directed wholly to the problems of this world, and then just give it up to the invisible one? How, in other words, can one be a saint and still organize scientific movements of world historical importance? How does one lean on God and give over everything to Him and still stand on his own feet as a passionate human being? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real ones that go right to the heart of the problem of how to be a man. A problem that no one can satisfactorily advise anyone else on, as the wise William James knew. The whole thing is loaded with ambiguity, impossible to resolve. I mean, it's... he literally just, like, did it or showed it, but like he said, he just wants to slide back into... this is almost like posturally agnosticism, or it's just like, yeah, there's no real answer. We can never really truly know. It's all ambiguous, so blah, 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 blah. When it's like... okay, you can slide back down to that perspective, but others here are trying to climb to the top of the mountain, so yeah. How, in other words, can one be a saint and still organize scientific movements of world historical importance? Like, again, he's just putting too much stock in the world. It's always like, okay, so you can reach this, like, absolute state of spiritual transcendence, but, like, is it any good for the world? Like, are you changing the world? Are you helping the world? Like, like, it's such a fucking, like, mundane, like, what are you doing for me, huh? I see you're thriving, but how does that help me, huh? Like, it's so, like I said, buckets or fucking crabs in a bucket. Like, they just want to fucking drag you back down to this fucking mundane bullshit. It's so annoying. But yeah. The whole thing is loaded with ambiguity, impossible to resolve. Yeah, I rebuke that entire statement. As James said, each person sums up a whole range of very personal experiences, so that his life is a very unique problem needing very individual kinds of solutions. Kierkegaard had said that same thing when he answered those who objected to his lifestyle. He said it was singular because it was the one singularly designed to be what he needed in order to live. It is as simple and final as that. Yeah. Oh. And that is it. That is, Kierkegaard's religious solution, Otto Rank's artistic solution, Ernest Becker's thoughts on those solutions, and finally we can get into the conclusions and what all this means, I guess. But yeah, I feel like this one is probably the most important one. Like I said, honestly, if I could cut this whole thing down into like 3 videos, I would do... No, actually, I could do it in 2 videos. I would do the preface and then these solutions video. Yeah, because I think both of these pretty much just sum up everything that needs to be said. You can, like I said, the Cope videos are there just so people can like look at them and like, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of see like that is kind of what I do with that. But like I said, you should probably, honestly, if you do want to look more in depth into this, just buy the book. Like I said, like I spent a lot of time like rearranging these to organize it into like my own presentation. So the way he lays all this out in the book flows probably a lot better. From his perspective, from what he's trying to say, it flows a lot better. But yeah. I think that's about it. It's been a while. I know. I don't really have an excuse. It's just this fucking series. Okay, now that this is over, I only have like one. Hopefully I can do it all in one. I'm pretty sure I can do it all. One more video to do, and then I can end with this fucking shit. God, I will never... There is only one other book I would ever do a full breakdown like this on, and it's The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. However you say that last name. Just because that one was, like, so... It was impactful. Like, it definitely, like, helped me gain some perspectives on, like, love and romance and sex and all that. But also, like... Also dove into like philosophy and like the meaning of life and like virtue and stuff like that as well. So that's the only one I would ever do. However, I'm not planning on doing it anytime soon. I do have like a whole list of videos that I want to do, and if I were to do a whole other series, what I would really ideally, like in a perfect world, like to do is a full breakdown of like the Marvel series and like all of the truth drops that are scattered throughout all of those movies. But that's more of a pipe dream. I don't know if that will ever come into fruition. But like I said, I do have a couple other videos in line. I think there was that one person, that Sub Rosa chick, who broke down the Moon Knight symbology. There was one video in particular that I was watching that was like, I need to do a react to this video. So that'll probably be my very next one after this series. But yeah, that's about it. I hope this, I feel like there's always more to say. Like I could talk about this entire section a lot longer. I feel like it definitely deserved at least another hour or so. But I think I pretty much summed up all the important, like, cliff notes of it. But yeah, just the idea of like forging meaning for yourself for a transcendent realm that has nothing to do with like the material realm. Like it's not like we'll get into it. I have the conclusions video. I'll get into it. Yeah, just keep an eye out for that. But yeah, thanks you guys. Catch you on the flip side.